Today's video is about a time when my curiosity got the better of me and I decided to run a bit of an experiment. See, I had been mountain biking on a Decathlon bike for a while and had grown somewhat bored with it. The bike's shortcomings became more and more apparent to me and I decided that I wanted to try something different. I wanted to kind of level up and get something that would provide a bit more growing potential. At the time, watching other more talented riders and their bikes, I had convinced myself that I would probably find this in a full suspension mountain bike. Now, whether this is a good conclusion depends on who you ask, but given that I had experienced only hardtails at this point, I at least wanted to know how the two types compare and figure out what I would prefer. I decided that I wanted to buy a full suspension bike, but there was a bit of a problem. See, full suspension mountain bikes are quite expensive. Like, more than I had ever spent on a car or motorcycle. I was not yet ready to spend that type of money on this hobby yet, especially because I wasn't completely sure if I would even like that type of bike. Something that I did notice, however, is that second-hand marketplaces are full of these old-school full suspension mountain bikes that cost next to nothing. That's when I started to wonder, can you take an old bike like that, make some adjustments to modernize it, and get an experience out of it that's good in today's standards? Can you keep up with people on modern mountain bikes and also enjoy the benefits of full suspension while spending way less? Well, I decided to try, and today I'll tell you about what I got, what adjustments I made, and what I learned using it and trying to keep up with people on modern bikes. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is the bike that I got. Unfortunately, I only have one picture of it before I started modifying it, as at this point I didn't yet know that I was going to make this video on it. So unfortunately we'll just have to make do with this. The bike that I got has 26-inch wheels. The tires that were on it were very dry and old and had to be replaced. The fork that was on there had very short travel and was not adjustable. The brakes that were on there were actually quite interesting. It's one of the reasons I actually wanted this bike. It's because there's a mechanical disc brake in the front and actually one of those rim brakes in the rear. But as you might notice, there is also a brake disc in the rear. This would make it really easy to make an upgrade and go to hydraulic brakes. The bike had these really narrow handlebars on there, which was really typical for the time, as well as these twist grip shifters. Obviously it has a rear shock and a fairly standard for the time 3x7 gearing. Now this bike in this condition I would not have taken to any trail. It felt very funky and weird to ride, and it really was time to do some upgrades. So let's talk about what I got. Oh, and by the way, this is not a track. Those stickers are just there to bamboozle you. Someone put those on there. This is actually, I believe, a crosswind bike. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't really find anything on it. Now let's talk about the parts that I got for it. Firstly, I wanted to upgrade to hydraulic disc brakes, so I ordered Shimano MT200s, along with the required mounting adapters. These brakes are fairly budget friendly and provide decent value for money. They would also make a huge difference in the braking performance of this bike, so they were really a no-brainer. I found out that the rear shock was very much beyond repair, and so my girlfriend's dad, who's actually a bike mechanic, gave me one he had laying around. Thanks, Rob, very cool. Knowing now that the rear suspension was going to get a significant upgrade, I decided that I would have to do something about the crude old front fork. I ended up getting this second-hand 26-inch RockShox fork that I figured would be a nice pairing with the new rear shock. This would also require the placement of a new headset, which was a bit of a hassle but also well worth it. I got some simple straight handlebars which were similar in shape to the old ones but a lot wider to hopefully improve the control and stability. For the shifters I decided to keep with the twist grip style as a bit of a nod to this bike's history. I also replaced some other parts like the saddle, pedals and tires with decent value alternatives. I guess at this point you're probably wondering how much I've spent on this bike, so let's break it down. These are the numbers including shipping costs. I got the bike itself for €55. Hydraulic brakes were €71.95. Like I said, the rear shock was gifted to me. I tried to look it up to get a sense of how much it's worth. But all I could find was this one that sold in 2015 for 60 bucks. So let's go with that. I got the new fork for 70 euros and the headset for 13 euros and 94 cents. The handlebars were 37 euros and 90 cents. Miscellaneous parts, including the saddle, grips, pedals and tires, added another 137 euros and 86 cents to the bill. And so in total, if you count the rear shock, I ended up spending 446 euros and 65 cents. I should also mention that Rob helped me out with the parts that require special tools, like pressing in the headset bearing cups and cutting brake lines to size. Despite being able to save some money that way, I'm still pretty comfortable calling this a sub 500 euro bike. That's about what you could expect to pay for a budget hardtail. So now let's check out how this bike turned out. So this is the result. Some months have actually passed since the transformation and some minor tweaks have been made to improve the usability, like this bottle cage on the frame. I think this bike turned out really interesting and I like the way it looks a lot. Everything really just came together well on this bike and I'm really happy with it. So what's it like to use this bike and can it keep up? Well, let's start with how it rides. I've now spent quite some kilometers on the bike, riding alone and with others, and it's definitely very fun to use. The new fork and rear shock help to maintain good grip on rough terrain and effectively keep you comfortable on longer rides. The hydraulic brakes are pleasant to use and a lot more precise than the old ones. The added control through the wider handlebars provides a stronger sense of confidence while riding. Having said that, the narrow 26-inch wheels require strong focus as they don't deal with rocks and tree roots as well as the nowadays more typical 29-inchers. This definitely gets tricky from time to time as you get quite some sideways movement from your wheels dealing with rough terrain. A bike like this definitely has a lot of personality and the twist grip shifters really add to the experience of using it for me. As far as keeping up with others goes, well, that's complicated. I tried to think of a way to objectively compare the performance of different mountain bikes, but that's not easy to do. And on top of that, I don't have other full suspension mountain bikes to directly compare it to. I did, however, get to ride this back to back with a modern hardtail though, and that painted a pretty clear picture for me. The bike that I compared it to was a Trek Pro Caliber 9.7. This bike has a carbon frame and isn't full suspension, so right away it looks a little unfair towards my old bike. However, it is a nice aiming point as far as current day mountain biking goes. And riding in groups, you probably won't find many non-e-bikes faster than it. So as far as keeping up goes, I think it will tell you everything you'd want to know. I got to try two different scenarios. In one, I was on my bike trying to keep up with someone on the track. And after that, we did some rounds where me and the person I was trying to keep up with were both on Trek Pro Calibers. Not exactly scientific, I know, but it's the best method I have for testing at this point. What I found is that on the twisties and single tracks, my bike really doesn't do too bad and it's quite doable to keep up. Where I started to struggle though is under climbing. My bike weighs roughly 15 kilos, where the Trek sits at about 10 kilos. On top of that, the Pro Caliber's drivetrain just seems to be more efficient at translating the power from the pedals to the ground. This is not to say that climbing isn't doable on my bike, but on the Trek it's just noticeably easier. Obviously, climbing tends to make up a large part of an average mountain bike ride, and therefore you will start to struggle trying to keep up on longer rides. It just takes more energy to keep up. I suppose that if you are in great physical shape and have good endurance, you can probably make it work, but it really is a lot harder. Let's now try to get to a conclusion here. I do want to cut my bike some slack, as I honestly think it does pretty well for the amount of money spent. Fact is that I would never have even considered taking it to the trails in its original state, let alone make this comparison. Therefore, to some extent, I would consider my experiment somewhat of a success. I'm not saying you should go out and replicate this, but if you ever wondered what a modernized 26-inch mountain bike would be like, now you've got a pretty good idea of what you could expect. I realized that the premise of this video is quite silly. I mostly just wanted to know what a creation like this would be like to use and figured it would be fun to show you as well. Hopefully you at least found it entertaining. I want to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you next time. Bye for now.